Okay, can everybody see the presentation? Great, thank you. Okay, so just a quick outline of what we're going to cover today, first of all. So we're going to focus on difficult workplace situations and key policies that can help you manage those situations. So we're going to do that for around 20 minutes. Then we're going to move into breakout rooms where you can discuss a scenario, or you can discuss a real life situation that you've experienced in the past with your peers, and we'll do that for around 20 minutes. We'll then regroup into the main Zoom room, and we'll have a group discussion about a second scenario. Following that, we thought we could use the last part of the session for anything else that you want to talk about, anything that's come up, anything that we can do to support you. Okay. So, managing people is a skill and can be challenging. This session will cover how to manage difficult situations, including performance issues, absence or attendance issues, disciplinaries, and grievances. So we'll discuss different scenarios, how to be proactive in avoiding escalation, and discuss your successes and challenges that you've had while dealing with these situations. Things don't always go as planned in the workplace, and as people managers, you will deal with all sorts of scenarios. Important thing to remember is most people do come to work with good intentions, and a lot of workplace issues can be resolved informally with open conversation. This session is about the issues that you haven't been able to resolve informally. So things like performance issues. So for example, a skills gap where someone doesn't have the skills to do a significant part of their job, or when negative behaviours or a negative mindset gets in the way of doing the job well. So ill health and poor well-being can also impact performance when someone is not well enough to attend work, and this obviously impacts on their ability to do their job. So these would be classed as capability issues, and they're normally unintentional. Conduct issues, for example, deliberate neglect of duty, bullying and harassment behaviours, they're possibly sometimes more intentional, but not always. So to provide clarity on what is and is not acceptable in the workplace regarding capability and conduct, one of the basics is to have policies and procedures in place. So to provide that clarity on expectations and standards, and what you expect from your team members and what they can expect from you, these are the key policies that we recommend you have in place. So we have performance management, a capability procedure, disciplinary and grievance procedures, and attendance management. So these are the 4 key things we're going to cover today. We also recommend that you have a probation periods policy in place, equality, diversity, inclusion and belonging, and that you have agreed organisational values or a code of conduct. So everything you do, the way you manage your people is all done within a culture of fairness and respect. Okay, so performance management, so that's setting goals and providing feedback on a regular basis, can help avoid issues or avoid issues escalating. So setting and monitoring of objectives can be done in an appraisal format, or it could be done less formally and on a more regular basis in one-to-one chats and meetings. Sharing feedback about performance is key, and following up conversations with a short note in an email, including any feedback that was shared, is a helpful approach. The coaching approach is something that we recommend as well. So key elements of the coaching approach is active listening, so really listening to understand what your employee is saying, listening to understand, not listening to answer or to argue. So you're listening to understand. You're asking good open questions that help you understand a bit more about the situation, and you're challenging negative behaviours. Another key part of coaching approach is that providing feedback. So providing feedback, but also accepting feedback yourself. So when things have reached a point where all these things just haven't worked, managing the performance issue in a more formal procedure is a good option. So this slide sets out what that would look like. So you have a performance issue. You've already set clear, achievable performance standards and expectations, but there hasn't been any improvement. So you're moving into a more formal process here. And the first step would be to invite your team member to a formal capability meeting at stage 1 of the capability procedure. So important things to remember when you're doing this is that you have to give notice of this meeting, so 5 days notice in writing. You have to make the person aware that they can invite a trade union rep or a current colleague to join them in that meeting. And the meeting is to really discuss and understand the performance issue. So you're explaining your side, what you're seeing, what you're observing, and then you're listening to the feedback that you're receiving from your employee to get a deeper understanding of what's going on. So you're aiming to understand the reasons. Through that, you should hopefully be able to agree support measures, so any reasonable adjustments that you can make to make it to remove any barriers to the good performance. So that could be things like additional training or additional support, more time spent with you in one-to-one meetings to really focus on getting that improvement. And you agree a formal improvement plan with clear timescales. And really just to underline how that the issue is a serious issue, and to give the person fair warning that things could escalate. You issue a warning or a caution just to confirm how serious the issue is. You have follow-up meetings to review the progress. You can adjust the plan if you want to. And at the end of the time period that you've agreed, if you haven't seen an improvement or enough of an improvement, you escalate to stage 2 of the process. So the end point of this process, once you've worked through stage 1, 2, and you get to stage 3, the end point could be dismissal or it could be redeployment. So that's really why it's so formal, and why you need to follow up in writing, and why you need to issue a warning, just to underline that the end point could be that the person actually loses their job. So we'll go into more detail about dismissals a bit later on and how to do those in a fair way. Okay, so that's the capability procedure. Does anyone have any questions about that? If you do, you can ask now or later on if you make a note of them, or even if you put them in the chat, and we could answer them a bit later. Okay. So I'm moving on to the absence management procedure now. So absence management in general, these are just some tips about how to manage absence in general. So some organisations follow a capability procedure for both performance and absence related issues. I recommend having 2 separate policies, so having a capability policy for dealing with performance issues and a absence management policy and procedure for dealing with absence and poor attendance. Really, because they're just so different. The things you'll be discussing in those meetings will be so different. So key things to include in your absence management procedure are on this slide here. So keeping accurate records. So when someone calls in sick, you're keeping a record of that. Avoid, if possible, recording sickness as annual leave. Having a clear procedure that everyone is aware of. Having trigger points. Staying in touch while off sick. Some people feel that they can't stay in touch with their team members when they're off sick, but you can agree a reasonable amount of contact just to keep you updated on how they're doing. Yeah, your policy should include the option for reasonable adjustments, and yes, you need to have a fair process for managing short-term and long-term absences, which I'll go on to on the next slide. But just to say about trigger points, a reasonable example of these trigger points would be, so if somebody's off sick 3 times in, say, a 12-week period, that would trigger you to meet with them, to have a chat, have an informal chat about their attendance. So 3 instances in a 12-week period, or 5 instances in 5 instances or 10 days over 12 months. So that's just a guide. It doesn't mean that you have to trigger a meeting every time someone's off sick for 3 times in a 12-week period. It is just a guide. It's just for you to note that. So if someone's off 3 times in 12 weeks, you go, okay, that is reaching kind of possibly unacceptable levels. I'm going to have a chat with them and find out a bit more about what's going on. And that would be very informal at that stage. And if somebody does have a disability or a long-term health condition, you would adjust those triggers. So it might be that somebody, say, if somebody has asthma and it's hay fever season, you'd maybe adjust those triggers a little bit to accommodate that they might need a little bit more time off sick while they're kind of in their worst kind of period. Okay, so we're going to go on now to look at a fair process for managing short-term and long-term absences. So if someone is off work due to sickness on a regular basis, you should deal with it informally in the first instance, and you address the shortfall in attendance one-to-one. So you just explain the situation, explain your expectations, find out if there's anything going on that you need to think more about. If that doesn't make a difference, so when the informal approach doesn't make a difference, you move into the formal process. And again, you're always aiming to understand the reasons or underlying reasons for the absences. Again, the trigger points don't apply to absences related to disability or to pregnancy, but you can still manage attendance if someone has a disability and they're unable to attend work on a frequent basis, or if they're on long-term sick. You just have to be more flexible and make as many adjustments as reasonable. Okay, so long-term absences, absence of 4 weeks or more. And you'll see on the slide, again, it sets out the process that you would follow. So you would invite somebody to join you in an attendance management meeting. You'd give them notice in writing, 5 days notice. They can take a trade union rep or current colleague with them. The main part of the meeting will be discussing the attendance shortfall and trying to understand what's going on. You would consider referring your team member to occupational health to give you a medical or a professional opinion on what's going on. You agree support measures, reasonable adjustments, and again, you agree this improvement plan with clear timescales. So you would set out the improvement plan. You would say something like, you need to reduce your attendance, you need to increase your attendance and decrease your absences. And again, you would issue a warning to underline the seriousness of the issue and give them fair warning that it could escalate to stage 2 and possibly dismissal if you're not able to if they're not able to attend work on a regular basis. Yeah, just saying that if you are thinking of dismissing somebody or going through this process with somebody that has a disability, you really need to take some HR advice or speak to ACAS or an employment lawyer if you are thinking of dismissing someone with a disability, just to make sure that you're not putting unfair barriers to their employment in place. So just to make sure that you're doing everything properly. I do recommend that you take further advice if it is somebody with a disability or a
Caroline,
long-term health condition. Yeah.
before we move on, Ashley had a question about
Yeah.
sickness leave when working remotely.
Yeah.
If you could touch on that for a moment.
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, sick leave when working remotely. So you should follow the same process. So your staff should be aware that if they're not well and they're working from home, they still need to call in sick. There is a bit of a culture now in lots of organisations where if you're just not feeling 100%, you still continue to work. So try to discourage that. We use the example of if you don't feel well enough to leave the house and get on a bus or get in the car or walk to work, you shouldn't really be working that day. So you should actually call in sick if you're not well enough to give 80, 90, 100% to your job. Then you should call in sick and look after yourself and feel better. Okay, does that answer that question? Okay, so I'll move on. So disciplinary procedure. All the amazing situations that can happen at work. So disciplinary procedure. So a fair and transparent disciplinary procedure can really contribute to positive employee relations. Employees are more likely to feel secure and supported in their roles when they know that workplace issues are addressed in a consistent and fair manner. So you might never need to use this procedure, but you should always share it with your new starters, and just remind everyone that that's a procedure that's in place and what it's for, and it is to seek a fair resolution to any disciplinary issues that come up. Okay, so the well-implemented disciplinary procedure reflects your commitment to maintaining a respectful and safe workplace, and it sends a message that negative behaviours will be challenged. It helps to ensure everyone is treated fairly and equitably. It sets clear expectations and provides opportunity for improvement. And it also helps mitigate the risk of escalated conflict or grievances and reduces the risk of legal challenges. Okay, so as well as following your own disciplinary procedure, and if you don't have one, we do have a template that we have shared with you and we'll share again following this session. You should also be aware of and follow the ACAS code for workplace grievances and disciplinaries, and also the ACAS guide to handling workplace investigations. So they're guides that go into a lot of detail that we can't cover all that detail today, but if you are ever in the situation where there's a disciplinary issue and you need to move to this formal stage, the ACAS code will keep you right. Okay, so informal approach first, as we've discussed in all the other scenarios. So you try the informal approach first, unless it's very serious. If it's a serious case of something like fraud or stealing or bullying and harassment, then you'd go straight to formal. But if it's something that could be just a misunderstanding or a retaining issue, you would try out the informal approach first. Okay. So the first step in the disciplinary procedure is to establish the facts. So you would appoint somebody to investigate what's happening, and then you'd also appoint somebody a separate person to chair the actual disciplinary hearing. So the investigating officer, they look at what's happened. They prepare a report for the person that's chairing the hearing. They don't make any decisions or come to any conclusions. They just present the facts, and they can make a recommendation about whether they think it should go to a disciplinary hearing or not. So if they investigate and they find that there's nothing really has gone wrong, it's just a misunderstanding, then they would recommend that it doesn't need to go to a hearing. If they find something, if they reveal something through their investigation that suggests that something has happened, they'll recommend that it goes to a hearing. So again, the ACAS guide goes into a lot of detail about this. So at the disciplinary hearing, which you invite the person to in writing with 5 days notice, at the hearing, you're discussing the issue, you're setting out your case, what you think's happened, and you need to give the employee a chance to respond to that. So you need to hear and seek to understand their side of the situation. And you take all that into consideration. There might be mitigating circumstances. It could be a training issue, or it could be a communication issue. It could be that they're experiencing something outside of work that's impacting on their conduct at work. So you need to consider all these things that your employee has shared with you. And then following the meeting, you make your decision about what you think should happen next. So if you decide to issue a warning, you need to put that in writing following the meeting, and you need to give the person the right to appeal against that warning. So the appeal is a further stage where another person within your organisation or outside of your organisation even would look at everything again and make sure that that you'd followed a fair policy, that you'd considered everything that the employee had brought to the meeting. Yeah, okay. So you'll see on this slide also that there's a table here with the warning levels. So there's the first level warning, second level warning, final warning, and dismissal. And then we've got the suggestion here about who should have the authority to issue these warnings. So this is basically just to make sure that if you are dismissing someone, that the most senior person within your organisation has considered the situation and made the decision, or backed your decision. And then also on this side, I've got the ACAS Code of Practice and the ACAS Guide to Conducting Workplace Investigations, just to remind you that those are really useful resources.
Caroline, we've had another question,
Yep.
if now is okay. From Sarah, can you please outline what you describe as an informal approach, and would you have this approach outlined in the policy?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. The informal approach would be, it would be a one-to-one chat between you and the individual, where you would let them know what you'd observed. You'd ask for you'd ask them to respond to that, and try and work out what's happened. You would challenge the behavior or the conduct, and you'd let them know that it's not acceptable within your organisation, and you'd let them know that if it happens again, you'd be meeting in a more formal way next time. So it's really just giving them a chance it's pointing out what's gone wrong and giving them a chance to fix it and do better without going through this formal process. So obviously, if it's something really serious like fraud or stealing or bullying or violence in the workplace, then you would go straight to the formal investigation. But if you think it's maybe just a misunderstanding or a training issue, you'd meet informally first of all, just to give the person a chance to do better. Does that sound okay? Okay, so next, so we're looking at stage 3 in a process on this slide. So if you've worked through stage 1 and stage 2 and you haven't seen any improvement in someone's conduct or their performance, stage 3 is where it gets really serious, and you're thinking about possibly dismissing somebody or redeploying them into a different job within your organisation that might be a better skills match for them. So when it comes to dismissal and redeployment, this is where you really have to think really carefully about what you're doing and possibly take HR advice or speak to ACAS. So you need to follow a fair process in stages, so the stages that we've set out, and you need to be able to evidence this. So you'll need to have records of that you've done all these things. You need to show that you have, well, you need to consider reasonable adjustments, and you need to show that you've made these reasonable adjustments, and that you've considered things like changing the person's duty, that you've considered flexibility on where and when they work, if appropriate. So if it's a attendance or a performance issue, you're considering these things. Redeployment, we've already covered that. If it's a dismissal due to ill health, then you need to seek occupational health advice. You need to show that you've taken a professional opinion about the person's ability to attend work on a regular basis or return to work if they're actually off sick, on long-term sick. And importantly, you need to give the person the right to appeal against the decision to dismiss them. Okay, so I'm just going to move on to this next slide, which is, this is taken from the ACAS Code of Practice for dealing with disciplinaries and grievances in the workplace. So you'll see that they recommend considering mediation at any stage. So that's definitely a good option, to consider mediation as an alternative to the formal process, if appropriate, or during the process. So the first point in this process here is taking the informal action wherever possible. So we've discussed that. Where that hasn't worked, you move on to taking formal action, establishing the facts, notifying the employee in writing, holding the meeting, allowing them to be accompanied, and then following that, deciding on what action you're going to take. The next step is to inform the employee of the results of the warning. So that could be a first written warning. Final written warning comes at the next stage. So yeah, at this point, it's first written warning, and you provide them with an opportunity to appeal and an opportunity to improve. That's what it's all about. So if that doesn't work, you wouldn't normally go to dismissing the employee straight away. You would normally go back into this cycle and you would take formal action at a higher level, so at stage 2, and then you'd work through the cycle again. You'd issue a more serious warning, so a final written warning. You'd give them a chance to appeal and the chance to improve. If they don't improve, you go back into this cycle and then you meet with them at the stage 3. So again, a meeting followed up with a dismissal decision or a redeployment. If it is a dismissal due to ill health, you could have more stages in this process, just to make sure that you've really given the person a fair chance to improve, and you've had an opportunity to take professional advice. Okay, so that is from from the ACAS code of practice. And this, in the worst case scenario, if this goes badly wrong and your employee invites you to join them in an employment tribunal, this is what the employment tribunal will look at. They'll look for evidence that you followed this code of practice. Okay, so any questions about dismissals before we move on to grievance procedure? Okay. Okay, so employees can raise a grievance if they have a concern or complaint about their work, their working conditions, or with a relationship or relationships with their colleagues. It's important to follow a grievance process to ensure that issues are addressed and to maintain a fair working environment. Offering mediation as an alternative to a formal grievance is also seen as good practice. So a bit more about mediation. So it's a voluntary and confidential process where impartial third party meets with the individuals involved and helps them to reach a mutually acceptable resolution. So we definitely encourage mediation, but it's also important to note that it's not suitable for all situations. In some cases, a formal grievance process might just be necessary to address more serious or complex issues, or if one or both of the parties aren't willing to enter into mediation. So yeah, the key with grievances really is to assess each situation individually and provide your employee with options that best suit the nature of their grievance. So again, the grievance procedure should include an informal stage. So again, that would be the first step to resolving the grievance. So it involves the informal meeting would involve encouraging open communication and seeking to find a resolution informally. It is a good place to start with the informal meeting, but again, it might not be appropriate if it's a really serious grievance or if the person doesn't want to deal with it informally. So the steps for the grievance procedure are on the slide here. So starting with the informal approach, and then followed, if it is a more serious grievance, you'd ask your employee to put the grievance in writing to you. You'd acknowledge the email in writing, so you'd acknowledge receipt, and you'd meet to discuss the grievance. So you wouldn't have an investigation meeting. You would have one grievance hearing where the same person listens to the grievance and tries to resolve it. You might need to call an investigation a disciplinary investigation if during the discussion of the grievance they share something that is a disciplinary issue for another member of staff. So if they're being bullied by another member of staff, that would be a separate process that you'd have to go through with the other member of staff based on the findings of the grievance hearing. So that's where it gets slightly more complicated if you have a grievance process that then results in a disciplinary with another person within the organisation. So it's really important to keep the team member updated. You might not be able to share all the details of the actions that you take to resolve the grievance if it does involve disciplinary action against another member of staff. You might not be able to share details of that. You shouldn't share any notes from the disciplinary meeting with anyone else. That does happen sometimes in a grievance where they want to see the notes from the disciplinary meeting with the other individual. You can't share that. So it's good to let them know early on that you might not be able to share much detail, but really to assure them that you are dealing with the situation. And again, you confirm the outcome in writing, and you give the right to appeal against the outcome. So if the person isn't satisfied with your actions, they have a right to appeal against that, and for somebody else to hear the grievance and possibly make a different decision. So it's possible, this happens quite a lot, that somebody might come to you with a concern or a complaint or an issue. They might not say, I have a grievance, or I want to raise a grievance. Sometimes in those situations, you might need to say to them, do you want to raise a grievance? Or here's a grievance procedure. If it's something serious and you don't think you can discuss it in the informal meeting, you should be asking them to put it in writing, and making preparations to meet with them in a grievance hearing. So you really need to put care and thought into resolving grievances. They're not normally straightforward. You won't be able to make quick snap decisions normally. The employee might have been holding on to the grievance for a long time, maybe even years. So you need to make some allowances for that, and some allowances for that during the meeting, they might need to express themselves and just let off steam. So yeah, just to be aware of that. We've previously shared a alternative or a kind of informal approach to dealing with grievances, less serious grievances, or even to avoid grievances in the workplace. We've shared an approach called the ouch and oops approach. So that's something that we can share again. So that's just a kind of approach to make it easier for employees to raise things with each other. Minor things that might have caused them, some might have caused them something they don't like. If something they don't like happens in the workplace, the ouch and oops approach can help you feel like you can just raise it, and the person can respond to it, and then everyone can move on. So we'll share that with you again. Okay, so any questions
Yes.
about any of that?
A couple of questions in the chat,
Yeah.
mainly around dealing with this in small teams. So Sarah's asked how you manage team working and support while simultaneously going through this process, especially in a small team. And Jen has also asked, how do you continue to cultivate a positive working environment whilst a member of the team is going through this process? Even though it's clear and offers both sides of support, I imagine it will still cause anxiety and stress. We're a very small team, and I think this would affect everyone's well-being.
Yeah, yeah, it is difficult, and these situations hopefully don't come up very often, but if they do, it is really important that you do follow a fair process. It's important in the first instances that everyone knows that the policy exists and why it exists, and that it is to support your employees, and it's to support you as employers to resolve issues. So I think just some time spent discussing the procedure, maybe as part of the induction, or you could focus on it in a team meeting. So it's something that's in place to support everyone to resolve these issues. The alternative is really, if you don't do anything about the issue, if it's a disciplinary or another conduct issue or a long-term absence, that's those feelings of pressure and anxiety will still be there, because there'll be this issue that everyone knows is there and that exists, but they feel like nothing's been done about it. So yeah, so I think it's how you present the policy and procedure to your team members and how you handle it. So the process is the process. Within the process, you really need to be listening and understanding and communicating with the individual, and also communicating with other members of your team without sharing anything confidential, reassuring them that you're dealing with the issue in a fair way, and having a timescale, that is reasonable. ACAS recommend that you try to resolve these issues through this process within 28 days. So really, by limiting the time period, it puts extra pressure on you as the manager, but it does limit that kind of anxiety, that ongoing anxiety. So yeah, I think was the first question about how small organizations can actually deal with this process when it involves so much time and resource. Because that's
Yeah,
quite.
I think so. It's a managing team working. Sarah, if you
Yeah.
want to unmute and expand if that hasn't answered your question, but I think that was the gist of it. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's something we do hear quite a lot of that. So some organizations that we've supported, we've recommended that they get an external person in to support them. So somebody from another organization or another organization's board that you trust. The person that's going through the process, so the person that's going through the disciplinary process or the performance management process, that they trust. So a third party that can take some of the the pressure off you as a person that's managing the team if an external person is managing the process with you. Lauren, have you got anything else to add about that?
I think I think appealing to whoever's involved in this process, appealing to their common sense that this is a small team and we need to maintain operations as though nothing was happening. So if they have an issue with another colleague, sort of saying, look, this situation is going to be dealt with. There is a policy in place, but we need to maintain productivity and we need to maintain, operations as though nothing was happening. Maybe that's an idealistic thing to say, but I think it's important that everyone is treated as though they are an adult in these situations and sort of just appealing to their common sense and their desire to have things be over as well, that can kind of help maintain normality during a situation that can be quite stressful, and certainly in small teams that is going to be heightened quite a bit. But I think Caroline's right in saying if you have the policy in place from the start that everyone is aware of, it's going to put everyone's mind at ease that it will be followed, and it will be done within a timely manner as well. So yeah, it is just something to accept that it will be difficult. And once you can accept that, it's then just managing it as per the process, which is a boring answer, but that is the thing that will help you through it as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and having things in place like your values and your code of conduct that will hopefully prevent grievances from happening in the first place in an ideal world. Okay, so we're going to move on to the breakout rooms now. So we're giving 20 minutes for this. So if you need to, as part of that, get a quick cup of tea or water, then that's fine. So yeah, so the breakout room. So you're going to discuss. It's up to you. You can discuss a real life issue from your past, something that you've observed or were involved in, but without revealing any sensitive or confidential information. I know you probably all know each other or each other's organizations, so please don't share anything that is too sensitive. If you'd rather avoid that risk altogether, we've got a scenario that you can work through together. So I'll share a link. I'll stop sharing my screen in a minute and I'll share a link to the scenario. So yeah, you're going to discuss something real that's happened to you, or you're going to discuss scenario one, and you have 20 minutes to do that. And then we'll bring you back into the main room. And then we'll have a discussion about the challenges of people management. Some of that's come up already. And key advice that you'd share with your peers, if you've experienced any of these situations, or if you've even seen someone else do it really well or really badly, if you want to share your advice with the room. So yeah, I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll share a link to the scenario. And then Lorna will set up the breakout rooms. Let me just find this link. So I'm going to share it in the chat. And just check that you can actually see it. It's in a Google Drive. Is everyone able to see that? The scenario 1, Kevin and Lucy. Okay, so we'll stop sharing, we'll stop recording as well. So when you come back into the main room, we won't be recording.